And welcome to I'm Jacqui LaMaitre.
And I'm Jaye McNally, and we're your co-hosts of Being the Head.
This podcast is for anyone who's ever led a school and quietly wondered, how much more can I give? Because headship, as we both know, comes at a human cost.
We've both lived it, and now we work along school leaders across the country who are carrying huge responsibilities, often with very little support. So this podcast creates a space for truth, connection, and practical help.
It's time to talk openly about what it really means to be the head and how to survive it with your well-being and integrity intact. Today, we're focusing on leading with integrity when the pressure mounts. Our values versus pressure. When is holding the line courageous care?
So, headlines from the head, the big stories shaping education. So, I know at the moment, Jacqui, it's funding and budget cuts are having significant impact on our behaviour and well-being, and the statistics are quite frightening, really. Funding in real terms is down by 6% since 2010 to 2023. Secondary disadvantage funding is down by 9%. Schools are cutting back on IT, particularly secondaries. That's 48% of secondaries and 56% of primaries. And I know a lot of issues that schools are really struggling with replacing their IT, and also cutbacks on educational visits. 53% schools are cut back on their educational trips. And also curriculum reductions, 33% fewer GCSEs are being offered and 29% fewer A-levels. So also staffing, losses to staff through redundancies are having a big impact. So we're looking at a reduction of 5,700 teachers and a reduction of 6,700 support staff. And I know what that means. That's, I've been made redundant from my most current post, and that was down to funding, lack of funding in order for the trust to keep the school improvement team going. So that's a real tough message for leaders at all levels, that tough budgeting. How do we prioritise our core teaching over broader learning? Is it the arts, technology that gets sort of streamlined and pushed out? How are we distributing our resources? Who's stepping in to cover?
Well, I remember as a head, when you get new heads, they say that they've really not had much training. And some of the budgets, £3 million budgets, £1 million budgets, let's try and balance. And it's a massive balancing job between resources, and that's the only place that you can really cut back is human and physical resources. And I know there's a lot of jokes about kind of Pritt sticks and all those sorts of things, but the reality is trying to keep that balance, isn't it, between what those teachers need to do the job and what you can actually afford, and trying to keep people in front of classrooms. The amount of schools, you probably know this, Jane, from where you started, was that actually TAs in a classroom for supporting a teacher is non-existent, very few. And where it is there, when I go and support schools, when I see TAs that are still in positions of supporting teachers rather than the child attached to a child's EHCP, it's very, very rare and is not sustainable anymore. It's just not sustainable to have that amount of human resources in a classroom. But is there a decline in the amount of children? Because I'm not seeing that in the schools that I'm supporting. They're oversubscribed in my areas. Perhaps other people who are listening, they might have that. But obviously we were taught when we first started in Headship that in order to have a balanced budget, you've got to have 30 children to support a teacher salary. Can you remember being told that?
I can. Yep. You need to have a full class. Bums on seats. Bums on seats equals money.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I remember most about, actually, to have that 30. So if you haven't got that 30, you're all the way down. So you've got to market in order to get that 30 children, haven't you? And how do you do that? We've not really been trained to market. We don't, some people are good at that. Some people are not. And actually, I remember coming across a lot of resistance in the community where I was working, because you've got two schools very close together, and it wasn't seen to be good practice to market your school. And to me, it was well, that's what you've got to do, haven't you? And it's up to the parents which schools they choose. So you're not saying you have to go to this school. You're just giving them an option. And one of the things I did do when I was first ahead is I worked out that actually I needed to market the school. So I made sure that I did it in a way that would appeal to children and parents. And we changed the whole kind of marketing strategy in our schools in order to get those bums on seats, and it not going down very well with the other school. You're just giving them the opportunity, aren't you?
Yeah. But I think the biggest, there's another factor now, as well as attracting parents and children to come to your school, is actually there's that decrease, that falling number in children actually coming into reception. And that's
Right.
what's caused, that was one of the reasons that there had to be some restructure in the trust that I was part of, because the number of children coming into our reception class had significantly dropped. When you've got good schools and outstanding schools that, can't fulfill their pupil admission number of 30, they've got 15 or 11, you can't sustain that. And this is like the second or third year sort of running. So you've got classes. So again, you've got that other pressure of heads having to think, well, actually, I've got to cut down my classes from maybe one form-entry primary school, which has got 7 classes, down to mixed age groups. So that then has an impact on mixed age planning and assessment. And some parents don't like it. We talk about funding, but actually the practicalities of it, the impact that it's having it is stressful. It is really stressful, because you think, okay, I need to do that. But then by taking that action, there is always a consequence to that action, and it always filters down.
I think, how do you weigh that up with what you must do and should do and can do in education? My bottom line was always, the teachers need to have the tools to do the job.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can't be in the business of educating if you haven't got the tools to do the job. I know you mentioned IT as a massive.
Yeah.
Now, these children are way above us in a lot of their skills. For us to try and keep, I mean, we know because we've done this podcast. I mean, what it would take my son, my 15-year-old, 10 minutes to do, it takes me a whole afternoon.
Yeah.
To kind of work out the technical side of all this. And I feel that it's our job to provide them with the knowledge, to give them the skills for the jobs that we don't yet know they're going to be doing. How do you do that when you're limited funding?
Well, I know of one school that I've supported where they were still using the notebooks that the DFE handed out during COVID. So the teachers were having to use those, and they weren't even charging. When they were taking them home, they couldn't even use them at home. So some staff were going out and buying a laptop so they could actually do their own job. That's not right. But that is actually the reality that some schools are having to sort of live with. And, getting children iPads so they can participate in the year 4 multiplication check. You've got like 10 iPads for a class of 30. How are you going to help children and support them with that if you haven't got the resources? It's just not right.
I mean, the passcode, the word on the street is the passcode for the multiplication check is going to rise. When I talk to heads about multiplication check, that's just really one interesting one to kind of talk about, because they're all saying, well, it's the tech side of it. It's not that they don't know it, it's that they haven't had the tech to practice on it. I mean,
exactly.
How bonkers mad is this? Actually, the children do know their times table, but they haven't had the opportunities to practice because the IT isn't there.
Yeah. when those resources shrink, where should leaders refuse to compromise? I think that's the question. Where should you refuse to compromise? And like you've said, at the end of the day, it is the impact on the children.
I remember being, Jane, I remember being 8 months pregnant and gritting the playground and standing there thinking I'm probably the most expensive gritter in the whole of this county because nobody did it, but we couldn't afford to have a person to do that job. And yet in order to open, we had to do that job. So who was going to do it? It does fall on the head. And I remember somebody telling me when I went from a smaller school, leading smaller schools to larger schools, what's the difference? And they said somebody puts the chairs out for you for your governor's meeting. And it's just those basic things that you end up doing. You do a lot of these other jobs.
You do.
And if you talk to heads, they'll say, I know how to change a bullcock on the toilet, and I know how to clean the guttering out, and I can do this and I can do the other, because the reality of it is they can't afford all these people to do these jobs in these schools. So they're doing it themselves. They're doing the cover supervision. They're doing this because of the cost of it. If they don't do it, that's hitting on their integrity of what those teachers need, which is they need to have the tools to do the job.
Exactly. I know you sort of joked about Pritt sticks and Post-it notes and pencils, but they're like gold. And the number of teachers that I know personally have gone out and spent their own money buying pencils and Pritt sticks so the children can actually do their work is ridiculous. And I know I'm on my own, and it's not right. It is not right.
Well, I still hoover up things from like conferences, pens and things.
Yes, I do.
You can't get out of it, can you? There's a pencil there. We can use that. Or, things out of your crackers. Or that'll be useful in the classroom. I don't think you could always spot a teacher at an event, because they will be the ones that will be hoovering up all these different bits and pieces, isn't it? I mean, the reality of this makes a difference to children in the classroom, because it means that I don't have to then go out and purchase all these different things. So massive, massive area. I think a lot of people can relate to like budget cuts, can't they? A lot of people.
And I think we've got some real challenges ahead of us as leaders. There are some real difficult decisions that they're going to have to make, and I think it's just keep sticking to your principles and your morals.
Yeah, definitely stick to it and make sure that those children get the best. And I think every head teacher that I've worked with will be doing that. They've just got to, it's just a fine balancing act, isn't it?
It is.
And have a kind of a mindset on actually how can I generate income? I used to have a mindset, there's money out there, I've just got to find it. I don't know where it's coming from, but I'm going to find it. And people will very willingly help schools out if that's something they can offer and they have the time to do it. So find ways and means of doing it. Yeah.
Be
definitely.
creative. Be creative.
Yeah.
Right. Classroom crisis, the real challenges from the front lines. So, Jacqui, can you recall a time where you held firm on a decision you made around a policy, whether that's behaviour or, I don't know, disciplinary capability, whatever, despite the backlash you knew you were going to get? And what anchored you? What made you stick to your guns?
I've had a real think about this, and I think two, actually. There's two things, I think. One is suspension. That's a massive one.
Massive.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Absolutely massive. And I think you have these conversations. When I was first a teacher about graduated approach, I think a lot of people can relate to this, having a lot of needs coming into the system, not really being trained with the amount of needs that are coming into the system for a class teacher. But legally and under teacher standards, you've got to teach that class. So is it the best placement? Now, I had more conversations and more battles with my brain as a teacher about whether this was the best place for that child. And I took that into my leadership as to whether those children needed more support and could they get it somewhere else. And the ridiculous scenario that you have is that actually the only way they can get support is if you suspend and it gets questioned. That for me, morally, that would be keeping me up. Waking up. Am I doing the best for this child? Am I doing the best for the school? Am I doing the best for the teacher? Am I doing the best? And what sometimes gets forgotten is about the other children in that class. So that for me was the biggest challenge, is making those decisions with the best interest, because you have to put on your integrity, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, suspension is a massive one because everybody's looking to see how you're going to deal with it, but you have to deal with it within the remits of the law, education law, but also in the remits of what is best, and just putting the child at the center of it and thinking, well, is this the best thing I can do for this child? But also you've got so much pressure. You have so much pressure from the local authorities, from the whole system, what you're going to do, what you're
Yeah,
going to do with that.
you've got parents, you've got
Yeah.
staff, you've got your governing body. If you're part of a trust, you'll have the trust sort of team behind, exec team.
So Jane, how do you, because you must have come across those sorts of situations. How do you think you stay calm? What sort of strategies have you got that you use to stay calm in those situations?
I giggle because I think if anyone knows me, that's probably the one area I have to work really hard at. Because
Is it?
I think when my emotions, you'll know exactly what I'm thinking or what I'm feeling before I've even opened my mouth, because the expression goes across my face. So I think it's really having to school my expression and stop and take a deep breath and count to 10 before I answer. And if somebody, if you've got a parent yelling at you, it's really, really difficult to take that step back. But it's just almost sort of detach yourself. So it's happening to somebody else. So you're sort of just letting them rant. And then I think it's just keeping it calm, keeping it simple, and keep communicating why you've made that decision. You've made that decision because it's in the best interest of the child, or it's in the best interest of that member of staff. And you just keep repeating that, and knowing that if you can go to, sleep at night, knowing that you're not worrying about it, that you've made that right decision. But how do you stay calm? It's really hard. It's really hard because you feel I think most people, you make those decisions, but they're very emotive decisions. So it's pulling on your own emotions and tugging at your own heartstrings. So you're dealing with your emotions, other people's emotions. And I think it's just being able to stop, breathe, take a step back, and actually take the emotion out of it, which is really hard, and look at the black and white and the policy and see, and then make a decision what's best for that child or for that person that's involved, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I've had a case where I made a decision on a suspension, and then it got commuted into an exclusion where the parents appealed against the decision. Quite, it's their right to appeal against the decision. And I remember thinking, very stressful situation for a
Yeah.
newbie head. I mean, this was sort of 4 years into my headship, and not really much support from the local authority, really on that position, but went forward for it and stuck to my guns. And I think what got me through it was what you said. It's sticking to your integrity of what is best for the child. But I remember sitting there, and the opening gambit for the panel was, "Mrs. LaMaitre, I can see you've got a master's in special educational needs. Would you like to tell me what you think this child needs?" And that was their opening gambit. And I thought, well, I'm going to stick to my guns and be resilient about it. But I had to draw on everything, I think, to kind of stick to that. What you're doing is correct for that child and also for the rest of them. So
I remember supporting a head, a new head, actually, a new principal, new to role, and we actually went to an external panel, a review panel with an exclusion decision that made. And that was really daunting. I have to take my hat off to this principal, because she had done everything that she should have done, and she knew that the decision she made, or the decision that was made, was the right decision for that child. And in that meeting, it was very emotive. It was very daunting. I was there to support her, but I wasn't allowed to say anything.
Yeah.
And I felt intimidated. I think the person that was chairing it happened to be a magistrate, and very imposing person. And it was like, oh, but she stood her ground. She was very empathetic. She was very sympathetic to the parents and the child's emotions and the whole situation. But she was so eloquent in why that decision was made and the reason for that decision being made, and the impact by not making that decision would have had on other children and other staff members. I think it was in her first or second year of being a principal. But again, she stuck to her integrity, her morals, and I take my hat off to her. I really do.
I think this is a side of headship that people don't see, and that's what we're really talking about on this podcast, isn't it? These things that people don't realize goes on, that actually to be ahead now. And I think even when I started many moons ago, that you had to have that really strong belief as to why you were in education, to be successful and to be to almost stay sane in the job, haven't you? You've got to have that. You really have got to have that, because you know that you're going to draw on it in all these dark moments. Definitely. Okay. So if I only knew the wisdom we wish we'd had sooner. So what truths about integrity did experience teach you, Jane?
Oh, I think that in people's integrity is different, if that makes sense. So my perception of integrity and resilience and sticking to the line is very different to somebody else's. And I think it's, don't judge people or think that people are going to lead with the same integrity that you do, because that's not the case. And I think if you go in with that mindset, thinking that everybody does the same as you do and has that same sort of understanding of what integrity is, I think you'll be very sadly disappointed and let down.
Yeah. I think that's one of the massive things that was a shock to me. I think when I first started in education, is that not everybody works at your rate or has the same idea about what education should look like. And I think that's a massive learning curve, isn't it? That actually you've got to look at it and see how you're going to lead is absolutely fundamental to your success as a leader, isn't it? How you're going to, and sticking to those things. I mean, they do a lot of work, don't they, about different leadership styles and things like that. And you do have to change your leadership style. So we're talking it that's completely different to actually what are your vision and values, what is your context, and how do you lead through that, and making sure you stick to that and being very, very clear about how you're going to do that. I always used to think it's leading a team is like a class. You're going to get the ones that are going to do things that differently to where you're going to get some that are going to work all the hours. You're going to get some that aren't. It is about getting to know your team, but also sticking to your guns and also modeling it. Modeling it is absolutely crucial, isn't it? You can stick to it. You've got to talk the talk, but do you actually walk the walk with that as a leader? Because I can tell you, they're watching your every move as a leader, aren't they? You don't know it. You don't think they are, but they are. They're watching you. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think also it's having you. I worked with a head teacher who was absolutely fantastic. She was creative. She was supportive. without her, I wouldn't be where I am today. But I think, and we all have our heroes that we think, you know, are absolutely perfect. But what was nice about this head is that she knew she wasn't, and she showed those imperfections, which meant that I know that I'm not a perfect leader. I never have. I'm not a perfect person, and I make mistakes all the time. But actually, I'm a human being, and it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to fail, because actually, that's from those failures, from those mistakes, that's where we learn to grow. So I think it's learning from your heroes, and probably learning from those that you don't really rate, because what you learn is
Oh, yes.
you learn what you don't want to be like. So,
Definitely. I think you've absolutely hit the nail on the head there. That's such a valid point, is about making sure that when you learn from your mistakes, you change your behaviors, and
yeah,
admitting that you've
yeah,
made a mistake. I was always doing that.
yeah.
I would always go into it with my deputy, shut the door and go, oh, that was not a good decision, was it? That didn't go down well. Can you remember those after those staff meetings?
Oh, yes.
Could have handled that one a bit better, Jacqui.
Oh, yeah.
But having those open conversations and admitting that when you've made the mistake, it's the people that
Yeah.
don't admit or can't see it sometimes. I've had people who cannot see it, and I've actually said, do you realise how you've just come across, how you've spoken to that person? And they genuinely don't see it at all. And
No.
they don't. And those are the people that don't survive in leadership, because they can't learn from the mistakes or don't admit ever that they've made that mistake. And it's vital, isn't it? Absolutely vital. So,
There's a lot of issues. Anyway, Jacqui, here's
yeah.
one for you. So, how did you learn that clarity equals care and not cruelty?
I think by making sure that you don't chop and change with things, that there are times where you can say, actually, that was not a, a good decision. But being a consistent leader, I mean, that word in education is bandied around, isn't it?
I
That
know.
consistency.
Consistency.
But actually being consistent with your values and doing what you're saying you're going to do. So if you're saying you're going to act on something, you do act on something. You don't leave it. You make sure that you make that decision and you act on that decision, because it's like I said before, it's that whole class element. They are watching to see how you're dealing with. So, accountability is a massive one in education, isn't it? But I always think they are watching to see, because there are going to be people that have different ideas about how they're going to teach and what they're going to do, and you're going to be leading those people. But actually, if you've got something that you say is going to happen, you make sure it happens. But consistency in how you treat people, I think, is one of the massive ones. But being very clear about what your expectations are. I remember listening to
Woodward. Yeah.
Clive Woodward. He
Clive
spoke
Woodward.
to a conference once, and it really resonated with me. Show them what outstanding looks like, he said. So who were the best rugby team in the world at the time? The All Blacks. Show them what their dressing room, their mantras, their visions, all those sorts of things, but be consistent with that and that expectation. And I think for me, that clarity of what my vision was, and it didn't matter where their starting points were, I wanted that for those children. Okay, so we're on to Ask the Heads, your question and our honest answer. And we've had some questions that have come in. So we've got one from a head from the West Midlands who wishes to remain anonymous. And he's saying, or she's saying, how do I lead with integrity when I'm being asked to exclude a pupil to appease parent pressure, even though I believe there's still more we could do to support them? Jane, I'm going to give you that one.
Ooh.
That's going to be most heads, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Most heads, they've got parental pressure to exclude a child. What
And
do you have to say?
I think you go back to policy and procedure. You go back. Why, what has that child done? What's your behaviour policy say? What has the school done to support that child? Because actually, ultimately, at the end of the day, a behaviour, good or bad, is a form of communication. So
Yeah.
why is that child or why is that pupil behaving in that way? So have you actually done everything you can? At the end of the day, you are there to champion for the children, not the parents. And you are going to have to make some really difficult decisions that are going to upset a small amount of parents. But if you know it's the right thing and you followed your policy and procedure, then you stick with it. And you're just going to have to pull up your big girl, your big boy pants and just hold your head up high and go out there, because this is going to be the first of many difficult decisions that you are going to upset or not conform. And at the end of the day, you are the leader of that school. You are the children's champion, and you need to do what's right for the children that have been placed in your care, irrespective of how other stakeholders may feel.
I think that's about, ultimately, you're accountable for the health and safety of children on your school site. And you'll be the one that has to be held to account for it. So your decision has to be staying firm. But you're right, to follow those policies and procedures and to make sure that you've done everything that you possibly can. But you're never going to please everybody all of the time.
Moment of mindfulness. Make time to stop and reset. So this week's mindfulness is something really simple and something that we do every day, but actually how many of us take the time to truly savor the moment? And I'm calling it a cup of calm. So how many of us have made a hot cup of tea or a hot coffee when we've gone into school for the first part of the morning, and we actually haven't drunk it, and we actually go back to drink it at 12 o'clock at midday at lunchtime, and it is stone cold? Well, actually, that's not your cup of calm. So you need to make yourself a hot drink, and I want you to take 1 full minute to smell, sip, and actually savor it without multitasking, without looking at your emails, without sorting through your mail, that's your paper mail that's been dropped in by the receptionist, or answering a question. But just close your door, take a minute to just sip, savor that hot cup of tea, coffee. If you're not a tea or coffee drinker, a sip of water, whatever it is, but that cup of calm is really, really key.
That's a brilliant one, Jane. Thanks for that. Absolutely brilliant. I mean, I used to have herbal teas because you could drink those cold.
Yeah.
It's so sad, isn't it, that you can't even get to drink. I mean, the other one is going to the toilet, isn't it?
I was just
Drink
about to
a cup of
say
tea,
that.
or go to the loo. You just get into that. I mean, what is the positive side of that is your days just fly by in education, don't you? Never a dull moment. And you look at the clock and it's like 3:30 because your days just fly. There's so many things going on. But to have that cup of calm, I think is a brilliant idea. Take that time, make that hot drink and savor that drink. Thank you so much for that one. So we're on to in my school bag, a simple affirmation or mantra. So Jane, do you want to share with us what your mantra was? Go
So
on.
I've got 2. The first one is actually from Finding Nemo. So when I went into Headship for the very first time, my children were quite young and they liked Disney Pixar or whatever. And Finding Nemo was my eldest's favourite movie. So like all parents, so you off you trot to that cinema, and it's Dory saying, "Just keep swimming." And I've used that so many times when things have been really, really, really hard, when I'm really tired and all I want to do is crawl under my desk and rock backwards and forwards. I've just kept saying to myself, just keep swimming, just keep swimming. And I've even sung it to myself like Dory, just keep swimming, just keep swimming. And it just get me through that. And then the other one was from a lady both of us know, actually. And her saying was, if you've got to have a difficult conversation, always have it in the morning. And one way to remember that, you know who I'm talking about,
Yeah, I
is
do.
eat your frogs for breakfast. And when I've used
Yeah.
that before, people have looked at me and like, eat your frogs for breakfast. Well, no one wants to eat frog, full stop, never alone for breakfast. So always have those difficult conversations first thing in the morning, because actually, you know, you're not sort of mithering over it and building it up. So just rip that band-aid off. So for my 2 mantras is just keep swimming when you're in a really difficult spot and you just want to give up. And when you know you've got that difficult conversation, eat your frogs for breakfast. What about
Brilliant.
you, Jacqui?
Oh, I've got one that I've taken all the way through, and it's actually from the same lady. And she showed us a cartoon, and it's a picture of Moses, and he's standing in front of the sea, and it's parted, and he's got all his followers behind him. And he said, and it says, "What do you mean it's a bit muddy?" And I went, I love that, because it's no matter what you do as a leader, there's always going to be an "ah, but" person, isn't there? And it just brings you back to like, whatever you do, there's going to be, yeah, hang on a minute. Just, yeah. And that for me was just one of the most magical things, I think, about it, and realization that you can never please everybody all of the time. Oh, yeah, but it's a little bit muddy. So, yeah.
Okay. Oh, God, love her. She was brilliant.
Mm.
Absolutely
Yeah.
brilliant.
So, clarity isn't cruelty, it's care. Hold the line, share this episode, and keep leading from your values.
Here are some key resources you might want to keep close. So the Education Support Helpline is on 08000 562 561, or you could always head up to Heads Up Network, or there's the DFE School Leader Wellbeing Charter, or Supervision for School Leaders.
So if this episode has helped, please share it with colleagues and subscribe for more conversation about what it really means to be the head.
We see you, we stand with you, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.